It was the ref show in the Big 12 this past weekend. Utah thinks the refs stole the BYU game from them. Texas Tech and Colorado both did not like the refs, and even Dean Blandino didn't like the refereeing in that Colorado game. Let's talk about it.
You are Locked On Buffs, your daily podcast on the Colorado Buffaloes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Buffs. I am your host, Kevin Borba. Today's episode is brought to you by our sponsors over at FanDuel. You could start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. We are also brought to you by the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day for free and available wherever you get your podcast. So make sure to like, subscribe, and follow. And I appreciate you guys for tuning in and making me your first listen of the day. My everydayers, you know who you are. You tune in every day. Love you guys. Let's dive right into it. I think this past weekend of Big 12 football was filled with fascinating games that were sort of clouded by iffy officiating. And it's really unfortunate that that's what it comes down to, because I feel like these games had sort of instant classic feels to them, and we're walking away talking about how the refs either cost a team a game, gave a team a game, or whatever it is. So obviously, we'll start with BYU. The BYU-Utah game is a historic rivalry, the Holy War. Utah leads the series historically. Utah's struggling a lot this year. The two teams kind of like flipped. Utah was expected to run the conference, and BYU was projected to finish near the bottom. They're flipped around. Utah is fighting for bowl eligibility, and BYU is currently in first place in the conference, and they're undefeated. So they are well on their way to at least being in the playoff discussion, regardless of what happens, assuming they don't lose. The officiating in that game was interesting. I think it comes down to, I have two main points about officiating when it comes to the Big 12. One, the Big 12 refs are about as inconsistent as it gets. We saw it at the end of that game where a defensive holding was called against Utah after they sacked Jake Retzlaff, on fourth down at BYU's 1. And that was supposed to be sort of the game-winning play. Instead, kept the drive alive, allowed BYU to charge down the field, which, I mean, Utah's defense should have stopped them if they want to win the game. But it kept the drive alive, and they ended up kicking that game-winning field goal. Now, Utah scoring 0 points in the second half doesn't help their case, but their AD came out and ripped the officiating, and I've never been to a press conference where the AD comes out unless a coach is getting fired or hired. And so that was interesting. He got fined 40,000 fat ones for that. And then two, Kyle Whittingham, who is very much I would say close to the vest kind of coach, very respected, very stoic college football coach. He called the officiating ridiculous and even slammed a chair. So clearly they were bothered by the officiating. There was officiating issues in Colorado. There was a combined 23 penalties between the two teams. I think Texas Tech fans probably feel like there was more calls that didn't go their way than Colorado's. Despite that, Colorado was penalized 14 times for 106 yards, and Texas Tech was penalized 9 times for 80 yards. And on the broadcast, Dean Blandino of Fox was like, these officials are not doing a good job of managing this game. And I think that the Big 12 refs are sort of taking the mantle from the Pac-12 refs of like, oh gosh, you never know what to expect. And we saw it in that Utah game, right? I think there was a play with Brant Keithy where he ended up getting hurt, which season-ending injury for him. That looked like defensive holding, could have, or at least could have been. That wasn't called, but they called one on a play where the receiver was held. I think you call that if that's what you think. I just don't know if they had been calling plays like that all game. And so the Big 12 refs are inconsistent. I think these are all the complaints that we got this past weekend. Utah AD, Utah head coach, Deion Sanders didn't like how the refs were handling the throwing the fan debris situation where Texas Tech fans were throwing water bottles and other debris at the sidelines. And yeah, the refs didn't seem to care. There was no penalty. There was no punishment for that. Joey McGuire Texas Tech head coach, did not like the reffing situation. So clearly there's a comeuppance when it comes to the refereeing situation in the Big 12. With that being said, this is my second takeaway. That's my first takeaway. There's a Big 12 ref issue. I just don't know if they're good or if they're inconsistent and they're not setting a precedent right away, which is making it difficult for these teams to sort of understand what can happen and what can happen. My second takeaway, and this is the biggest lesson for Colorado as they look to continue to win and battle through to the college football playoff, right? They control their destiny. They're currently in second place in the Big 12. If they win out and all things go, if they win out, they're in the Big 12 title. They'll probably end up facing BYU unless they lose a game and then things get complicated. But my biggest lesson for Colorado, my biggest takeaway for Coach Prime's squad is you cannot be in a situation to where the officiating can decide the game. And I personally have of the mindset that officiating can't decide a game, in the sense of, did that, like BYU game, for instance, did that call allow BYU's drive to continue after it would have ended at the 1 yard line? Utah probably would have powered it in, gone up by, I think, 10 or so. Yes, 100%. Or I think they were, let's see, I'm bad at math. Either way, they would have gone up by a margin that they were unable to come back from. So it would have been 28-19. Yeah, I think that did play a factor in BYU winning the game. That being said, if you're Utah, you can't score 21 second quarter points and not score again. If you're Utah, you can't have your quarterback be absolutely nails in the first half and then finish the game 12 of 21 for 110 yards. If you're Utah, you can't allow BYU to win a game where they go 1 of 12 on third down conversions. You also had more penalties for more penalty yards. You won the time of possession, and you had 3 turnovers. So those moments are more important to me than one call. That being said, I think the general population, whether it be teams, fans, coaches I think are a little bit better at this, will point to one moment and be like, hey, that cost us the game. And it's like, did that cost you the game? Or was that just the most memorable moment at that time? Because that's what it seems like to me. I think same thing with Texas Tech, right? Texas Tech fans were complaining about the calls that were called or weren't called in this game against Colorado. Let's just go through the big moments, right? You had a 13-point lead in the first half, first quarter, mind you. And then Colorado scores a touchdown, and then you go punt, miss field goal, and then you score a touchdown in the third quarter after Colorado scored to take the lead. Colorado scores again. You go turnover on downs after a Colorado touchdown, interception, fumble, downs, fumble return touchdown. That fumble return touchdown happened when it was 34-27. Obviously, they had to charge down the field and score a touchdown with, I think, 1 or 2 timeouts. But Barrett Morton gets the ball knocked out of him. Texas Tech wide receiver had a prime opportunity to pick that ball up. Instead, it was Shiloh Sanders who had the wherewithal to do so. So you can't blame the officiating. I'm not going to pretend like the officiating in these games weren't questionable, poor, horrific. That being said, BYU, Utah, Texas Tech, and Colorado, every team had moments in those games where they either capitalized or squandered a prime opportunity. So this being said, for Colorado, you have to handle business. You have to take the refs out of the game. You have to make it so they're not a factor. You have to make it so your season and championship aspirations, playoff aspirations cannot come down to, well, if we got that call from the refs, we win that game. If it comes down to that, you were never meant to be that team. And I think that's the hard pill to swallow for a lot of teams in college football. When we come back, I'm going to be talking about how great a job Deion Sanders is doing on the field and off this season. But first, a word from our sponsors. This episode of Locked On Buffs is brought to you by our sponsors over at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5, get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Welcome back to Locked On Buffs. I appreciate you guys for tuning in every single day, making me your first listen of the day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to like, subscribe, follow my everydayers, comment below. I love you guys. You guys make this show possible. Also, if you want a question answered for this Friday's mailbags, make sure to comment it below in the comments, or at least throw in a comment so that way I can address that as well. Let's dive into it. Deion Sanders, I think, may have done the best job in college football as a head coach from year 1 to year 2, and maybe just the best job in general. I know Curt Cignetti at Indiana also has a great case for that. I wouldn't argue with either case. I look at what this Colorado program has been, and Curt Cignetti is doing a great job at Indiana. I want to preface that. He wins everywhere he goes. Google him if you haven't. He's really good. That being said, this Colorado program went from bottom of the barrel to last year they were on top of the world for 3 weeks, and then back to the bottom of the barrel, and now they're contending for a playoff spot. Like, this Colorado program was written off for dead. I think the biggest difference for me between Deion Sanders and Curt Cignetti is, in a way, I don't know if people expected Coach Sig to sort of be 10-0, because Indiana's never been 10-0. They haven't beat Michigan since it was like 1988. That being said, he has a history of winning. He is from the Nick Saban tree. He is proven all that in this. Coach Prime had not won at the FBS level. And I think a lot of people wrote him off after last year. I think there's a lot of questions about his ability to coach, a lot of questions about his ability to manage the team. I think there was questions about his ability to recruit at major positions that weren't wide receiver or DB. Could he build a team? Is he just there for his sons? Like, there was a lot of questions about him. And he comes out here, one, puts together a roster that I think on paper is the most talented in the Big 12. Two, puts together a staff with Robert Livingston, who had yet to coordinate a defense, and Pat Shermer, who I think a lot of people were iffy on, and has gotten the best out of both of them. Colorado's defense is one of the best in the country at getting sacks, forcing turnovers, second half scoring. Our friend Scott Proctor, which is kind of funny, he got called out jokingly by Cameron Simon Craig after the game, asked him, hey, you guys are allowing 7.3 points per game this season in the second half. And Cameron was like, don't say that. I saw you post it. You did the math. But Colorado's defense, like Scott said, 7.3 points per game in the second half. Like, Deion Sanders figured out a way to build a contending team and contending staff around him. And I think he's doing a fantastic job. His game management has improved. The only thing that I think this Colorado team, I don't want to say they haven't improved at, but I think there's room for improvement the most, is penalties. I think that's like my one big, if I had to complain about something, right? This Colorado team is continuously one of the most penalized in the country. And it's, I don't want to say it's going to come back to bite them eventually, but you can't continue to sort of just rack up these penalties and expect to win games. And I hope it doesn't cost them a game, but they rank 121st in the country in penalties. They have 70 for 633 yards. They average 70.3 yards per game penalty-wise, and 121st in the country, which is only better than Utah State, UCLA, South Alabama, UAB, Bama, SMU, Liberty, Ole Miss, San Diego State, New Mexico, and UTSA. So not a lot of contenders are getting penalized a lot, and the ones that are, they've had some issues along the way. But that being said, Coach Prime and company have figured out a way to overcome pretty much everything, and I want to make sure he gets his props. Deion Sanders, again, in this 2020, Deion Sanders in the 2024 college football season has revamped his roster, found the perfect coaching staff for him, complemented his superstars, and has seen results. And I think that's what everyone was wanting from Colorado. And I think that's where a lot of people lost interest in them over the past year or so. It's because they talked a lot last year, had brief results, and then fell off. Now they are proving what they were saying is true. Deion Sanders is talking that talk and walking that walk. And I think that's the biggest difference from year 1 to year 2. So shout out to him. Also, in terms of recruiting questions, Colorado just got a crystal ball prediction, or Julian Lewis just got a crystal ball prediction in favor of Colorado. If Deion Sanders lands a 5-star quarterback, things are going to change. I can tell you that, because he's showing that he cares about recruiting now. And I think that was one of my biggest concerns with him is he recruiting for the future, or is he recruiting for the now? And I think it looked like at times he was recruiting for the now, and what happens in the future, they'll figure it out later. They're just going to keep banking on the portal, which works sometimes, right? Last year didn't work. This year it did work. But getting Julian Lewis, they just got a crystal ball for Carter Smith as well, the 4-star offensive tackle, who also committed to USC. Like, Coach Prime is making some waves on the field and off of it, and it's exciting to see it. And this Colorado program is really trending in the right direction. So if you were doubting them, now is the time to sort of maybe delete those old tweets because I've seen a lot of receipts on the timeline. A lot of people are getting exposed. So if you were doubting those Colorado Buffaloes and you were very vocal about it, I would go through the inventory and maybe erase those tweets because people are cognizant of that. They remember those things. So Colorado, Deion Sanders doing a hell of a job this season. The job's not done yet, but regardless of what happens, assuming they don't completely collapse down the stretch here, this Colorado team is world better than last year. And I think a lot of people deserve, or a lot of people need to give Deion Sanders his credit. This episode of Locked On Buffs is brought to you by our sponsors over at Game Time. If you want to catch a Colorado game or any sort of game or event, Game Time is the place for you. Game Time has Game Time picks, which makes getting their tickets even easier, and you could save more on sports, comedy, theater, whatever it is near you or all around. All in pricing. If you toggle this feature, it shows the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. You get a seat view. You get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy it. And their lowest price guarantee or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Welcome back to Locked On Buffs. I appreciate you guys for tuning in every single day, making me your first listen of the day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to like, subscribe, follow, comment questions for Friday's mailbags. We have a lot of fun with those if you haven't done so already. Let's dive into it. Colorado plays Utah. It's going to be an interesting one. It's not like last year's matchup where it's Ryan Staub versus a JUCO walk-on who had never played, Luke Batari. This year it's Shedeur Sanders and a hot Colorado team taking on a Utah team who I think, to be blunt, is in pure crisis mode, right? They had their offensive coordinator step down. They just lost a receiver from the roster. They just lost Brant Keithy, who's one of the best tight ends in the country. Their quarterback situation is atrocious. It's Brandon Rose. It's Isaac Wilson. Doesn't matter who it is. Their defense is good. Probably one of the best in the country, to be honest. But the offense's issues, I think, erases that. I think people don't realize how good this Utah defense is. They have a top 15 defense in the country. Like, they're literally, Utah's defense is the reason that their games are even as close as they are. That being said, you look at where their offense ranks, and it is not great. I think they rank at or near the bottom in a lot of categories, and that's obviously not where you want to be. In terms of total offense, they are ranking, sorry, my laptop's being a little slow, 92nd in the country. They average 362 yards per game. They have 23 offensive touchdowns. I think Shedeur Sanders alone has more touchdown passes than that, if I'm not mistaken. Like, this Utah offense cannot keep up with Colorado at all. Their best hope, Shedeur Sanders has 24 touchdowns. The Utah offense as a whole has 23. So if Colorado is doing well in offense, this Utah unit cannot keep up with them. This is the perfect sort of game for Colorado because Utah's defense prides himself on stopping the run. Colorado doesn't run the ball that well. It has been better in past weeks. I think Isaiah Gustav continues to show that he can make an impact in one way or another. He had 10 carries for 32 yards this past game. Not the best, considering he was coming off a week where he had 91 yards, and the week before that he had 53 and a touchdown. But that being said, this Colorado team should have no issues airing this thing out. I don't think the Utah secondary can hold up enough against Colorado. I think it'll be ugly in the first half. That being said, Colorado is going to turn it up, and I don't think Utah's offense will ever be useful in this game because Colorado's defense is also quite good, and I think people are learning that as time goes on because I think a lot of people wanted to paint this Colorado team as a one-dimensional team where it's like they're all offense, no defense, and maybe last year, but right now they rank 68th in total defense, and they rank in terms of turnovers gained, they rank 29th in turnovers gained. They have 16 on the year. In terms of sacks, they are about as good as anybody in getting to the quarterback. Colorado ranks 6th in the country in sacks with 29. They're averaging 3.2 per game. The only teams that have more are Ole Miss, Boise State, Pitt, South Carolina, North Carolina. So Colorado's defense is much improved. I think they could disrupt this Utah offense, which already struggles. And I think the Shedeur Sanders and company could air it out, space out the Utah defense and make them a non-factor. So I'll talk about this Utah game more this week. I appreciate you guys for tuning in to Locked On Buffs, making me your first listen of the day. Make sure to like, subscribe, and follow. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Have a great Monday, everyone.